Hey everyone, welcome back to another game. Today I thought I would go over and over the board game I played a few months ago, before lockdown. So yeah, my opponent was an international master, rated about 2330 FIDE, and I was rated about 2230 FIDE. So my opponent began with e4, I responded with the Sicilian defense. They played knight to f3, I played e6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, and knight to c6. And I went into a Taimanov Sicilian here. And one of the main perks of the Taimanov Sicilian is this queen on c7. It's really well placed. It eyes up this diagonal, it eyes up this file, controls some squares over here too. And also, once I play a6, the queen will be securely placed. No knights will be able to come to attack it because the pawns will defend both b5 and d5. My opponent played bishop to e3. They played the knight to b5 immediately, I can just retreat my queen. Let's say bishop e3, I play a6, the knight retreats, and I go to c7 with the queen, and this would just transpose to the game line. So yeah, after bishop to e3, I played a6. They played queen to d2, preparing to castle long. I brought my knight out to f6, putting pressure on e4. My opponent castled long, and I brought my bishop out to e7. And here my opponent played f4, which is not the most common move. The main move here is f3, preparing to play g4. F4 is good because it's aggressive. Immediately white's threatening to play e5, forcing my knight to retreat. The drawback is that it leaves this e4 square a little bit weak. Especially when white plays the pawn to f3, you can see that this pawn on e4 is defended nicely. But, oops, sorry about that. After f4, e4's been weakened a bit. So therefore I counterattacked with b5. And after e5, b4. They took my knight. If they retreat the knight, I can just bring my knight to d5, which would be fine. But after e takes f6 by my opponent, I took. I'm attacking the queen, so they took back. I took with the bishop, and they played g4, looking to play g5. And I had looked at all these moves before the game in preparation, but here I forgot my analysis. I hadn't looked at it in a couple of months, I think. In my analysis, I had the move h6 here to prevent the move g5. And after h4, bishop b7, if my opponent would have tried g5, remember this is just my analysis, this isn't what happened in the game. If g5, I take, they take back, and I have a bishop on e5. And the main point is, I don't have to take this knight on d4, and the bishop's really great on e5. I definitely don't want to take that knight off. In the game, after g4, I played bishop to b7, and now after g5, I did have to take on d4, because if I retreat the bishop, well, they will take on c6. If I take back, they're going to win g7, which is really bad. So after g5, I had to take the knight on d4, which was a little bit annoying. They took back the rook. I can't take the rook because I'd lose my queen. I defended the queen, thus making knight takes d4 threat. And here I think my opponent made a small mistake. If we have a look at the black position and we look for weaknesses here, apart from the slight weakened dark squares here due to the fact I traded off my dark squared bishop, another weakness is this pawn on a6, which is already attacked once by the bishop on f1. So actually rook a4 here would have been a good move for white, I think. The rook looks a bit odd on this square, but actually it's completely fine. It's not going to be vulnerable at all. Instead, my opponent played rook to d2, and I think it was just a little bit better to go after my weakness. And if we have a look at this diagonal, this rook on h1 is definitely looking quite vulnerable here. So I tried knight to e5, a tactical shot. It's not good for black. It doesn't lead to an advantage for black. Also, knight to b4 was an idea here, which maybe was a little bit better than knight e5. I went for knight e5 though. And here my opponent played queen takes c7. I took back, and as you can see, if they take my knight, I'm just going to win an exchange here. So therefore, after rook takes c7, they didn't take my knight. They played bishop to b6, which is a nice move. I think I had foreseen it though, and I had planned my response. And I played knight to c4 here, which sort of works tactically for black. If I play rook to c8, well, this is actually just kind of bad because my opponent would have this move bishop takes a6. And, well, now if I take the rook, they're going to take my rook, which is not good. And if I take the bishop, they take my knight. And, well, I haven't taken the rook on h1. My bishop on it is on a6 now. So white's just won a pawn. So for that reason, after bishop to b6, I didn't retreat the rook to the c8 square. I brought my knight to c4. And now if they take my rook, well, I'm going to take their rook. And if they take back, well, I win that rook. And I win the exchange again. If they don't move back, they move the rook. Well, I'm very happy to keep the knight. Something like knight to f3 looks pretty good for black. So therefore, well, after knight to c4, they took my knight. I took back with my rook. I'm still attacking this rook on h1, so they brought it along to d1. Attacking a weakness on d7. I would like to play this move d5 here, but the only issue with it is that it blocks this bishop on b7 in. So what I did was I played the move bishop to e4, which was a nice move and a very important move to have here. And I'm attacking this weak point on c2. If they take on d7 now, well, I take on c2, and I'm going to win their rook like this. So therefore, they prevented me from taking c2 with c3, but now I can play d5, and my bishop is much better on e4 than on b7, which it would have been in. So yeah, the game had gone pretty well at this point. Up to this point, we've got an opposite coloured bishop endgame, which looks roughly equal. Maybe my opponent's got a slight edge, I don't know. This pawn on a6 is still weak. They've sort of got a pawn majority which could get into action in the future. But I don't think black's got anything to worry about here. My opponent played rook to d4, and I actually blundered here, which was really annoying. I played rook to c6, which just loses a critical pawn after rook takes e4. And the point is, if I take back, then they're going to play check on d8 and win the rook on h8. I can take their bishop, and then they're going to take this pawn. And it's just not that good for black at all. So yeah, that was really bad. Also, after rook takes e4, rook takes b6, they have this move rook takes d5, and they just win a pawn. And this is what I'd overlooked. Believe it or not, I can't take back because of the pin. Had I just played my rook back to c8 after rook d4, my position would have been completely fine. Now after rook takes e4, I've got d8 covered, so there's no rook d8. And therefore, yeah, it's just a position. Maybe logical move for white here would be rook to a4, hitting this weakness on a6. But I think black's got a pretty decent position after h6, looking to open up the h-file. Yeah, let's say white takes. Well, I'm going to take, and I think black's doing very well here, actually. It'd probably be better for white to prevent me from opening the h-file for my rook. But after bishop takes, rook takes, it's just an unclear position, I think. I don't think either side's much better here. And yeah, it would have been a game. Black's not really worse, and I would have done fine, I think. Unfortunately, I played the move rook to c6, and my opponent won a critical pawn. This rook endgame is just awful. I did my best to fight, but yeah. I played h6, trying to open the h-file again. They played rook to c5, threatening rooks to c8 check, running my rook. I played king to d7. They supported g5. I took, they took. They've got h4 defended. Played f5, but black is probably just losing here. Check, I blocked. They came here, threatening rook c7, rook d5, check, king d6. They took. So I do have two connected pass pawns here. Unfortunately, so does my opponent. So it's just lost. King e5, rook f7. And the rest of the moves aren't particularly important. My opponent's two connected pass pawns are just too strong. And yeah, in this position, I just resigned since the pawns are getting through. So yeah, pretty interesting game from the opening point of view. Unfortunately, that blunder did kind of ruin things for me, but yeah, I guess the lesson to learn from this game is to just be a little careful for tactics, even in endgames. I think I relaxed a bit once we got to the opposite colored bishop endgame, because I thought the position was purely positional now, and I wouldn't have to really worry about tactics. So yeah, an interesting game. A bit disappointing. It would have been nice to try and get a draw or something from that position, but I'll just have to make sure I don't mess it up next time. So thank you very much for watching.